Hey Vision Chasers, it's Dr. Bird here with another social studies lesson for you today. Now, today's lesson is potentially going to be a life-changing lesson for you. Now, why do you ask? Well, it's because after this lesson, you may never, ever eat a hamburger ever again. Because think about it, when you get the ground beef from the grocery store, you didn't see that ground beef being processed and produced. So perhaps there's 100% cow in there, or perhaps there could be some stray dog, maybe even some roadkill, maybe even some rat in there. Well, no, I'm joking, or am I? Today's lesson is going to be about Upton Sinclair's book titled The Jungle and the Meatpacking Industry. Now, this book, The Jungle, was written in 1906. And it was written during a time known as the Progressive Era. Now, during this time, this is when a lot of people in the country were looking around to make changes to make sure that everybody living in the United States had a decent lifestyle. Now, it's important to mention, I say this a lot when I talk about the Progressive Era, that unfortunately not everyone was able to reap the benefits of this movement because definitely African Americans and immigrants were left out in the cold and they didn't experience the benefits as much as a lot of other people did. The people who really ignited this movement were journalists. They also wrote about how big businesses were cheating in order to get ahead. And they also sought to write about other wrongdoings that were happening during this time because they realized that people wanted to read these things in the early 1900s. Now, the journalists who wrote these stories for magazines and newspapers were called muckrakers. Muckrakers. So in the first part of that word on your screen, you see the word muck. Muck is defined as the dirt, grime, or mud. And then the last part is rake. And I want you to think of an actual rake. And what a rake does is when it goes through dirt is it kicks it up, it disturbs it. And ultimately, that's how things get cleaned up. But a lot of people at this time didn't like the fact that it appeared that that's all these journalists wrote about. The purpose of Upton Sinclair's book was to expose the poor working conditions in the meatpacking industry. But what would grab the reader's attention is something entirely different. In order to write this book, Sinclair went undercover as a worker in the Chicago meatpacking district. After his time undercover, he spent about 9 months writing the book. The book was actually about a fictional family of immigrants who lived in Chicago and worked in the meatpacking industry. And again, his goal was to gain sympathy for the worker who was working in such poor conditions. But it wasn't the poor working conditions that really shocked America. It was the poor handling of the meat that really shocked everyone. And Upton Sinclair wrote about that in his book. And here are a couple of things that he found. He found that spoiled meat that didn't sell well was actually ground into sausage. And in many cases, this meat was discolored and obviously spoiled. Additionally, Sinclair found that they had a huge problem with rats. And here is what he writes in his book. He says these rats were nuisances and the packers would put poisoned bread out for them. They would die and then rats, bread, and meat would go into the hoppers together. So hoppers are just big grinding machines that would turn big pieces of dead animal flesh into what you see as ground beef when you buy it in the store. So think of that the next time you go get some ground beef. Here's what he found out about the working conditions. It was not uncommon for workers to lose their fingers working on the machines. He also wrote in his book, he talked about men who fell into the vats, and when they were fished out, there was never enough left of them to be worth exhibiting. Sometimes they would be overlooked for days till all but the bones of them had gone out to the world as Durham's pure leaf lard. And lard, think of lard as cooking oil, Crisco. And many of the workers who did this work were unskilled immigrant men who did a lot of the backbreaking and dangerous work. And in many cases, these rooms were dark. They were They didn't have any ventilation. It was hot in the summer, unheated in the winter. And sadly, most workers earned just pennies per hour, working over 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. And Sinclair also discovered that these companies would bring in what were called pace setters. Now, pace setters were workers who worked for 50 cents an hour. Wow, they worked for 50 cents an hour, and they worked very, very quickly because they had more skills. And this would speed up the assembly line, forcing everyone else who was making pennies per hour to go even faster. So once the book is published and people start to read it, other people come forward and say, yes, Upton Sinclair is right about what he wrote in his book. It is true. I did some research and I found that under oath there was a meat inspector who talked about how sick cows would be processed and sold, and what they would do in order to make the meat look acceptable is they would cut off any bruises or tumors. Sinclair was actually written a letter by a consumer who found a little finger in a can of corned beef. So this finger obviously belonged to a child who was working in one of these plants. Additionally, meat inspectors were being influenced not to do their job correctly so that meat could be exported to other countries. So the United States government would step in and move quickly in order to reform the meatpacking industry. So they're going to pass two laws. The first law is the Meat Inspection Act of 1906. Now, this law would mandate that the Department of Agriculture would inspect all animals both before and after they are slaughtered for human consumption. The second law was the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906. And what this law did was it mandated that companies use only safe ingredients in their food. And also it mandated that they clearly state on the label exactly what consumers would be putting in their body. Well, that's it. That's everything. Well, most of the things you'll need to know about the jungle and the meatpacking industry. Hopefully I didn't gross you out too much. I know some of you at this point are thinking possibly about going vegan, maybe for the rest of your life, or at least until you can forget all of the things that I just told you. But that's our lesson for the day. Thank you so much for watching. Check the Vision Chasers website for more tips and tools to help you as you chase your vision of success. Also, feel free to download the worksheet that goes along with this video to help further your knowledge of the jungle and the meatpacking industry. Again, thank you for watching, and until we meet again, please keep chasing the vision. Bye.